New Jersey Forest Service Pocket Presentation.
Hi everyone, my name is Lauren Seclair and I am a forester with the New Jersey Forest Service. Do you know what forest data is or what it consists of? Today we're going to talk a little bit about what forest data is and why we at the New Jersey Forest Service collect it and use it. So let's get started. How many trees do you think are in this forest? Take a guess. Did you count the standing dead ones or the suppressed ones that are right under the canopy? How about the small seedlings on the ground? Do they count as trees or no? What even are trees? There are certain species that are considered tree species, but depending on what stage of their life they're in, we classify them into different groups. In order to start thinking about forest data, we need to have an understanding of what species are considered tree species versus shrub species, the ways in which we classify trees throughout their lives, and why we count and measure trees on the landscape at different scales. So what are trees and how do they fit into the forest? Well, trees are like people. They can be short, tall, wide, thin, and each are very different from each other. Unlike shrub species, whose branches arise at the ground level, trees have a single elongated woody stem from which branches grow to form a crown. And like we mentioned previously, depending on their ages or size, we can classify them into different groups. Seedlings are newborn or baby trees. These trees are less than 4.5 feet tall and smaller than 4 inches in diameter. Saplings are the tree teenagers. They're at least 4.5 feet tall, but still smaller than 4 inches in diameter. And last but not least, when a stem grows taller than 4.5 feet and greater than 4 inches in diameter, we can classify it as an overstory tree. It's important to be able to distinguish these different size classes from each other because collecting data from each group can tell us very different things about the forest. Did you know there are over 90 tree species in New Jersey? Unfortunately, we don't have time to show you how to identify all of them today, but we can tell you that the key to identifying trees by their species is to look very closely at a few characteristics such as leaf shape, leaf structure, leaf venation, bark texture, leaf arrangement on the branch, buds, flowers, fruits, and the location that the trees are growing in. For example, a tree could have blocky, scaly bark, needles and bunches of 2 that are about 2 inches long, have small pine cones, and be growing in an upland location. Characteristics such as these may help you to identify this tree as a shortleaf pine. It's important to know what species you have because different species are adapted to different environments and regions. Therefore, knowing information about where the tree is located, as well as the ecology and species range, plays a big role in identifying species as well. Since there are so many species of trees, and because a specific species presence within a forest can tell us a lot about the conditions of that forest, tree identification is always the first step of our measurement process. So how do you measure a tree? Once we've identified what species a tree is, we can start taking other tree measurements such as height, diameter, crown class, age, and we can even calculate the weight. Let's walk through what these measurements mean and why we take them. When you picture someone measuring the height of a tree, what do you see? Is it someone climbing to the top of the tree and dropping a tape measure down to the bottom? Because that's a lot of work. And thankfully, that's not quite how we do it. We use tools such as a clinometer or a Biltmore stick to help us measure the height while standing on the ground. Then we use that height measurement, a type of data, to help us calculate things such as tree volume, biomass, crown class, merchantable volume, and site index, which is a measure of site productivity that uses height and age data. Why do you measure tree diameter? The diameter of trees are measured at breast height, also known as DBH, which is 4.5 feet off of the ground. This gives us an idea of how well trees are growing over time, as well as tree volume and tree value, both monetarily and for wildlife. Tree diameter can inform foresters about crown competition, stocking levels, carbon storage and sequestration, forest health, and much more. Knowing the amount of trees in a given area and the diameter of those trees tells us a lot about growing space and resource availability within a forest. Stand management decisions, such as when and how much to thin a stand or how many sugaring taps can go into a tree to make maple syrup, rely heavily on data derived from tree diameters. Why do you measure crown class? Crown class is a measurement of competition among similar trees within a forest stand. Collecting this data can tell us a lot about what stage of stand development a forest is in and helps to guide management practices. Height growth is one of the most critical factors of competition. Trees that can grow the most rapidly in height are almost always the largest trees in all dimensions, including diameter and crown. As weaker trees are crowded out by their more successful neighbors, their crowns become misshapen and restricted in size. Unless a disturbance occurs that opens up a gap in the canopy, the suppressed trees eventually become overtopped and ultimately die. We recognize 4 distinct crown classes that are pictured here: dominant, codominant, intermediate, and suppressed. Dominant trees are generally taller than the average crown height and receive full light from above and some light on their sides. Codominant trees make up the general level of the canopy and are a bit shorter than dominant trees, receiving full light from above. Intermediate trees' crowns are generally narrow and are one-sided and are shorter than the dominant and codominant trees, but extend a little bit into the canopy. Suppressed trees have crowns below the canopy and receive no direct sunlight. Crowns are generally short, sparse, and narrow. Why do you measure tree age? We measure the age of trees at breast height, which is 4.5 feet off the ground, using an increment borer, a tool that takes a core about the size of a pencil out of a tree. This gives us an idea of the tree's age, how well the tree is growing over time, and what the history of that forest was, including drought years, fire years, or a glimpse into past forest management. How do you count the age of a tree from a tree core, though? Each year, a tree produces early wood or spring wood, which is lighter in color, and a tree also produces late wood or summer wood, which is darker in color. This means one light-colored ring and one dark-colored ring counts as 1 year of a tree's life. We can see in this picture the differences in early growth and late growth, as well as how a tree grows from the center outwards and what tree scars can look like internally, like the scar from a past forest fire. It's important to note that counting tree rings by the eye can't be done with all tree species because some of them don't show obvious rings, but there's more advanced technology that we can use to calculate age in those cases. Now, why on earth would you measure the weight of a tree? Do you pick it up with a crane and put it on a scale? Do you include the roots? Do you include all the leaves? The truth is, we don't physically weigh trees every time we collect data, but knowing the weight of a tree can help us to calculate biomass and therefore carbon stored. We can estimate the amount of carbon in an individual tree using collected data and established equations based on real samples. Since it would be too much for us to weigh every tree, scientists have weighed parts of specific tree species to derive species-specific equations that are based on a set ratio between a tree's diameter, its height, and its weight. Once we've calculated the weight based off of these equations, we can easily estimate the amount of carbon stored because a tree's weight is about 50% carbon. How do you have time to measure every single tree? It would be very time-consuming to measure every tree in New Jersey, so we tend to measure a subset of trees and expand that data to encompass similar forested areas. The amount of measurements that we collect is based on the level of sampling error we'd like to achieve in our statistics. There's a lot of scientific and mathematical thought behind where and what we choose to measure. Now that we collected all this data, what do we do with it? There are tons of great uses for data, and in the next few slides, we'll cover just a handful of them. First off, scale matters. How do we figure out how much data we should collect? Data can be collected at different geographic scales to inform what management practices can or should be done, and the first step to that collection is determining the necessary scale. When we inventory large-scale areas, like the entire state of New Jersey, we collect fewer data points because large-scale management is oftentimes more broad and less dependent on specific locations for management. As you can see in this map, each of these blue diamonds in New Jersey is a U.S. Forest Service Forest Inventory and Analysis plot, known as FIA plots. In New Jersey, all 715 FIA plots are remeasured every 5 years to maintain a current state forest inventory. Smaller scale areas, like Wharton State Forest and the Pine Barrens, have inventories that include a lot more inventory plots, 6,000 of them shown as green plus signs on the zoomed in portion of the map. We collect more inventory plots here so that we can prioritize smaller forested areas for many individual management projects. When we compare the different inventory scales to each other, we can see that within the boundary of Wharton State Forest, there are 6,000 state contracted inventory plots, but only 32 FIA statewide larger scale plots. Second, we use the forest data to assess forest health and guide management decisions. A healthy forest is one that is resilient to disturbance, functions naturally, and provides benefits such as clean air, clean water, wildlife habitat, and sustainable forest products. In order to receive these ecosystem services, amongst many others, We need to ensure that our forests are healthy and well adapted to future climate conditions. Management plans are written for specific forests based on what conditions and trends we see in the forest data that we collect and analyze. For example, in this photo, the forest on the right side of the road is not currently being managed, but the forest on the left side of the road was managed because data showed us that invasive LDD moths were killing off the mature oak trees in the canopy. Our management goal was to grow back a healthy forest of predominantly oak and shortleaf pine species, and we continue to collect data here to ensure that our management is successful and doesn't need to be adapted. All of these data measurements together can give us a full picture of the forest so that decisions to actively or passively manage specific parts of that forest for health and resilience can be made. We can also use data to calculate the effects of disturbances on forests, such as wildfires, insect outbreaks, flooding, drought, and many more. If we have starting data available, then when large disturbances occur, we're able to go out in the forest and remeasure those disturbed areas to assess how big of an impact the disturbance has made. This gives us insight into carbon emissions due to disturbance, and continuous monitoring of disturbed sites can give us information of how quickly we can expect to recover that carbon, or if it's even possible to recover it. Data collection methods are rapidly evolving with drones, LiDAR, and other technological resources that allow us to collect, project, and visualize more data than we could take by ourselves on the ground. We can also simulate management to show future forest conditions. The Forest Vegetation Simulator is a tool that can help us to compare different management approaches to each other in order to see which could help us to meet our future goals in the best way possible. Simulations can help us to monitor carbon storage and sequestration, as well as forest density, basal area, and many other forest metrics through time. Other programs like Visual Forester can take on the ground forest data and recreate it into a 3D model that can be virtually walked through. A simulation like this is valuable in spreading understanding of what management should be done, where it should be done, and why. It's also helpful in showing interactive before and after management views, where a user could easily see what similar management looked like in a different area or what to expect it to look like during and shortly after treatment. Thank you for joining us today to learn more about what kind of forest data we collect here at the New Jersey Forest Service. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at askaforester@dep.nj.gov, and stay tuned for some other pocket presentations.